Tonight on Free Minds TV, new data suggests that fruit juice could be just as bad for you as soda. Also, one Colorado ski town legalizes marijuana. And we'll be discussing inflation, plus a Downsizer Dispatch, a whole lot more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
And it is episode 133, and we have a lot of news to get into today, talking about ways to get people to think differently about some of the subjects. We're not right versus left. We're not Republicans or Democrats. We're something a lot different. We're something that's closer to what the founding fathers envisioned a government, a small constitutional-sized government where you don't have a government being your mommy or your daddy. You don't have the government micromanaging every aspect of your lives. You know, I didn't come up with it, but I heard an analogy that I really liked when I was reading, I forget which magazine on a plane, someone from Maine, some old timer in Maine said, you know, you got the Republicans and you got the Democrats, and one's a Phillip head screw and one's a flathead screw, but they're going to screw you either way. We're something that's not going to screw you. Maybe it's a nail. Maybe it'll get nailed. Anyways, but what we don't want is to just fall into line of what whatever talking head is talking, well, if we only had our people in power, things would be different. No, what we think is we need fewer people in power, and then things would be different. It's not saying that I've got the decisions that will make it right, or Nick does. We're just trying to get people to think of something a little bit different than the mainstream news, and that's what I wanted to start off with one article tonight talking about food stamps. Now, a lot of people, when they see this article, they're going to say, well, we need to dump more money into food stamps, and we need to raise the lower class by giving them more welfare. Well, the article, let's jump into it, and then we'll get our commentary on it, states that during a youngster's lifetime, nearly half of all U.S. children will be on food stamps, and over 90% of black children will be on food stamps before the age of 20. Now, that's a pretty large, a staggeringly large amount of people that just can no longer afford to buy food and put it on their table. Nearly half, 49% of all youngsters nationwide will be on food stamps, and 90% of black children will be on food stamps at some point in their lives, Nick. That's huge.
It is, and it actually is surprisingly high to me too, but it's not that surprising to me. I mean, I think what a lot of the problem is here is Americans, to a large extent, just aren't as prosperous as they used to be. I mean, it used to be that you could relatively comfortably live as, say, a family of 4 or 5 and have only one person in the household working. And now there's a lot of households out there where you have both parents working full-time jobs, and they're barely making it by, or they're not making it by, and they have to turn to government assistance. And I think a lot of what goes into that is the fact that tax rates are higher, and government intervention in the marketplace, regulations, taxes on businesses, things like that, they've really made American business, to a large extent, uncompetitive with the rest of the world. Our wage scale just isn't that great because we're not able to compete with other countries in Europe and Asia. We're just not the world leader that we used to be.
So how do we fix this, Nick? I mean, a lot of Democrats you would talk to would say, well, we just need to put more money on the problem. We need to get people out of poverty by giving them money, by giving them more welfare. That's what I've heard a lot of what the people who would consider themselves leftists say. Well, what should people do, though? I mean, in a sense...
There's a problem in that, though. I mean, there are some people who are on food stamps genuinely don't want to be. They need the help, and they take the help and they get off of it. But I've personally seen families who are on food stamps where the parents are spending quite a bit of money on cigarettes and beer or drugs, and yet they're on food stamps. Somehow they can't afford food, but they're making other poor lifestyle decisions. That's where they're spending their money. And I think when you give people that assistance, it can become a crutch, and they're not forced to address the issue of, well, I need to stop spending all my money on cigarettes and beer because right now I need to buy food for my kids.
Right. You know, Nick, and I think that's where I'm coming from too, where while I don't want to be just throw more money at the problem, because clearly that's not going to fix it. It's more recently we've been putting way more money towards poverty and making sure that people get the food they need, but still more and more people, these percentage numbers are going up, not down, are requiring aid from the government. I also don't want to be heartless and say, well, social Darwinism, let's weed them all out. If they can't afford to live in America, well, screw them, they're going to die off. What I think the solution would be is, as you said, Nick, get rid of some of these regulations that are squeezing out the middle class, but also let's stop relying on the government and start pushing towards private charity, because as you said, when you're getting a government check every month and you're getting used to that, and many people are getting off of it, but some people aren't getting off of these government checks, it's very easy to use as a crutch. But when you're going to charity, if you're going to a church or the Salvation Army or someone where private donors are putting in the money and people who aren't government workers, but people who are volunteers are helping you out, helping you get food, helping you get a job, helping you put food on your back as well as your children's backs, they're going to be, well...
I don't know if you put food on your back or on the table.
I'm sorry, I meant clothing. But anyways, you get the point. They're going to really be watching that person a lot more, helping them out. It's going to be more personal. Well, why can't you afford food? Oh, because you don't have a good job? Well, let me help you out with that. Not, oh, here's a check, and here's another check, and here's another check. If you're getting private charity involved, I feel that they're much more apt to really work with people and fix
and
the problem rather than just throw stuff at the symptoms, which is I don't have food to put on the table. That's a symptom of a core problem.
Yeah, and either people need, to get more skills, more training, get a better job. In many cases, that's a problem. Or they have, say, a substance abuse problem. Usually there's some underlying issue there when people can't support themselves. And clearly, it's not an uncommon thing. I mean, if half of U.S. children are going, according to this study, are going to be on food stamps at some point in their life, it's not really that uncommon that people are going to have problems. I mean, people do have problems in life. But if you actually want to help people, help them live happier, more fulfilled, more prosperous lives, you have to address those core issues. You can't just basically take care of their basic needs and let them go on doing what they're doing.
Just giving them money is throwing something at the symptom. It's not addressing the problem. And I would also state that right now charities are feeling the squeeze, but if there were fewer regulations, if everyone had more money because there was less government, less money being paid into taxes, Americans would have more money to give to charities, and thus charities would be more apt to help people. Anyways, we do need to move along. We've got a lot of stories to get to. Speaking of food stamps, a lot of money that's spent on food stamps goes to fruit juices. That's food, right? Well, how good is fruit juice for you? A lot of people think it's a very healthy alternative to soda, but we always like to try to steer people in the opposite of conventional thought and make them think a little bit more about it. And a new study has just came out, Nick, that says that fruit juice may be just as bad, if not worse, for you than drinking soda. Yes, even 100% fruit juice possess the same obesity-related health risks as Coke, Pepsi, and other widely vilified beverages.
Well, it's sugar water.
Yes.
I mean, that's whether it's fruit juice or soda, it's still sugar water.
Right, and you're getting more calories from sugar in most 100% fruit juices than you are in your average can of Coke or Pepsi.
And a lot of fruit juices don't actually contain very much fruit at all.
Even if it's 100% though, Nick, even if we're looking at 100% fruit, it still contains more harmful calories that are going to lead to obesity and other heart-related issues throughout
it's
life.
Got vitamins in it and stuff. If you're actually drinking 100% fruit juice, if you're drinking orange juice, I mean, I can see the point that it's still as fattening, it has as much sugar as soda, but you're still getting vitamin C and stuff that you wouldn't get in Coke.
Most people, Nick, get just enough vitamin C that they need, and the rest is going to be peed out anyway. So yes, you're right, you're getting these vitamins, but we're not having vitamin deficiencies here. So yeah, you are getting healthy vitamins, but you're just going to pee most of them out because you get enough vitamins in a day. You don't need several oranges worth of orange juice every day. You need an orange. And I mean, you get when you're drinking a glass of orange juice, you're drinking several oranges. And when you fill it up again, I mean, imagine sitting there and eating 12 oranges, Nick. But constantly people do that. Anyways, if you have a different opinion, fmtv@freemindstv.com is the email. We have a whole lot more to come up to. We're going to get into the Downsizer Dispatch and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
This is Glenn Jacobs, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, we have a whole lot more show to get to, Nick. Before we get into this week's Downsizer Dispatch, last week I don't know when you're watching the show, but at least last week for many Americans, people in the United States, they went out to vote. And this wasn't a national election where you're putting people on the national level as much. There were a couple of governors elected, as well as a lot of local politics. And I wanted to focus in on one local issue where people went out to the polls and decided to make a difference. And this is something that I would consider, if not nothing more than symbolic. Maybe it will actually send a message to some elected representatives. One Colorado ski town has voted to legalize, yes, we're not even talking about decriminalize, but legalize marijuana. The Colorado ski town of Breckenridge has voted overwhelmingly at a 72% of the vote to allow adults over the age of 21 to have up to 1 ounce of marijuana. Now, that's significant because this is one of the first that we've seen like this. We've seen medical marijuana bills being passed, and I think it's over 13 states now across the United States. We've seen a lot of decriminalization efforts. There's plenty of that, but there's still a fine of usually a $100 fine for up to an ounce of marijuana. But this, I think, is one of the first times I've seen marijuana actually be legalized, and essentially the state recognizing it, not the state, the town. And I should say that this is largely symbolic. It's meant to send a message because the state of Colorado, the state police will still be arresting people for marijuana, as well as the federal government. But the local police, well, they've now been instructed, hands off, this is legal, according to the local cops. So I think it's great news, people standing up for their rights and saying, you know, enough is enough. And we've seen this. If there was a voter referendum in a lot of places, it would be legal all over the place. I mean, it would definitely be decriminalized here in New Hampshire and many other places because the elected officials are way behind the times. Most of them have old white hair. They're going bald. They are on the verge of death. You know, the old people, those your elected representatives that supposedly represent you, but don't really because they are still with this old reefer madness mantra that they heard in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, a whole bunch of lies. Yeah, they still believe that. Anyways, most of the younger generations know the truth.
And that's largely true. I mean, the politicians are, I think, to some extent behind the times. I also think they're politicians, and they're going to be very begrudging about letting any kind of power slip away from them. Politicians don't generally try to scale back the size and scope of government. Even most of the politicians out there who will say that they're for smaller government, usually people who claim to be conservatives, if they say they're for smaller government, usually they still can't follow through on that. Probably 90 to 95% of the time, at least, when you get a small government politician, they're still going to vote on the whole to grow the size of government because that's what politicians do. They create new programs, they pass new laws, and for whatever reason, the people who are attracted to those positions of power aren't very highly motivated to do away with outmoded laws which are unjust, or just excessive regulation in general. That's just not their mindset. That's not where they're coming from, and that's not why they got into government. They could not pass more laws simply by staying home.
Yeah, and Nick, I'm torn on this issue. In one sense, I think that voter referendums are very dangerous because if you're having a pure democracy like this, it is going to be two wolves and a sheep deciding what to have for dinner. I mean, that's eventually what's going to happen on the whole. But in another sense, if the people want a liberty, a freedom back, shouldn't they be allowed to take it if a super majority of them want that liberty, that freedom, and their representatives are just saying, no, we're holding back from it? Shouldn't there be something that people can do? Here in New Hampshire, there's no voter referendums. I mean, if your representatives, and there's a lot of them, there's over 400 representatives here in New Hampshire, if they don't believe in something or they don't believe in a certain cause, even if 99% of the people believe in it or want a certain liberty back, they're not going to be getting it unless the representatives change. And people don't really like voting out the incumbents. I mean, even though people say that they're very displeased with their government, 90 to 95% of incumbents will be reelected every election cycle. That's on average. I don't know
on the
what
federal
it is right
level,
now.
That's true. I
don't know what it is on the local
over
level.
a 90%.
It's still a
incumbent
large
reelection
amount,
rate.
though. I mean, I see the same representatives every single time I go out to vote, and well, I guess they're pretty good about pot legalization here in Keene, at least. But do you get the point that I'm saying? What if we had a way where the people couldn't put something on a ballot that would take away liberties, but we allowed it if it was going to be giving us back.
Well, I mean, then you're kind of stacking
I can't
the
have my
deck.
cake and eat it too.
You're kind of stacking the deck. I mean, generally,
It's frustrating though.
it is frustrating.
Well,
but
we're in a representative republic where a
yeah,
Democrat.
and quite honestly, I think to a large extent you're better off that way. I mean, if you look at states that do have a fairly lax voter referendum process, like California, it becomes a nightmare because you essentially do have a mob voting on the things that they want at that particular moment, and they're not. It's not as limited of a process. There aren't the same checks and balances when you have, say, a Republican form of government. Not talking about the party, but just a Republican form of government, as in a republic. You've got usually a bicameral legislature, so a new proposed law has to pass the House of Representatives and the Senate, and get to the governors.
There has to be debate usually.
And
there should be at least.
And get to the governor's desk, and then, even if it makes it through those three hurdles, at least here in New Hampshire, you've also got the executive council, who are advising the governor, who can also kill a bill if it spends over like $5,000 a year or something like that. So essentially,
it's very hard to pass a law, essentially, or at least
right.
it should
In this
be.
state, there's essentially four distinct bodies that weigh in, and a law has to get through all of them, or a bill has to get through all of them to become a law. So
and then
I sort of prefer it that way. There are speed bumps in the way.
But when you're trying to get liberties back that the government's taken away, it makes it very difficult, Nick. And that's what I'm trying to say, because there's so many liberties that the people want back, but the government doesn't want to give us back. Yes, we allowed the government to take them away in the first place, but that was generations ago. What about this generation wants its liberties back? I guess we've just got to wait until we're all old enough to run for office. Because that's the problem. You have to be old to have the free time to run to office, to go to Concord or wherever your capital is. You have to have the free time in order to go do that. So you've got a lot of old cronies who have these old mindsets in office. Anyways, we do got to move along. We only have a few minutes, and it's time to get to the Downsizer Dispatch, where people can at least let their representatives on the federal level know how they feel about a certain bill. And we try to do that each week with the Downsizer Dispatch. What's on tap this week, Nick?
Well, this week's Downsizer Dispatch is a little bit different. It's not talking about an upcoming piece of legislation in Washington. It's actually talking about an effort on the part of the Downsize DC Foundation to put an amicus brief before the Supreme Court, arguing that the right to keep and bear arms is not only a right to self-defense against criminals, but also against tyrannical government, which is an important point to make. It's not just an argument about violent crime statistics. Really, if you look at the founding intent and the way the Second Amendment was written, and what the people at that time who wrote that document used their right to keep and bear arms for, it wasn't really for defense against criminals. I don't think that was the intent of the amendment. And I think the founding generation, the people who actually drafted that Constitution, understood that pretty well. And I'm not advocating violence here, but the fact of the matter is there are times, and it happens pretty frequently around the world, where governments get so far out of control that you're beyond any ability to rein them in through a democratic process or a peaceful process, because, well, they're killing people, oftentimes killing their own people. I've heard the figure that democide, which is governments killing people who are supposedly under their own protection, their own civilians, killed about 4 times as many people in the 20th century as all of the fatalities from all of the wars of that century combined. So when you think about who's the most dangerous government around you, statistically speaking, it's your own government. You're far more likely to be killed or oppressed by your own government than you are to be killed or oppressed by some foreign invader. So to me, it seems immensely important that that be emphasized when you're talking about the right to keep and bear arms. You can go to downsizedc.org to weigh in or contribute to putting this amicus brief together.
Yeah, and you can do that up at downsizedc.org. All right, when we come back, we are going to be talking about the economy, the inflation, the price of gold for 111, right?
$1,100 an ounce.
Well, it's a big number. I think it was 1103 is the last time I saw it. Anyways, we'll be back talking about that and a whole lot more. Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
And you're watching Free Minds TV.
This is William from New Hampshire Underground watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, Nick, for a while now, since the show first really started, we've been talking about inflation in the economy. A lot of things that the whole crash of the economy we were saying, because we were echoing the mantra of people like Ron Paul, people who have been predicting bubbles like this and messes like this for years now, and we've kind of gotten behind a lot of them and looked at their policy, and that's the policy that we were adopting. So it's been, since Free Minds TV's been on the air, it's been a few years now that we've been talking about inflation, been talking about these bubbles and how we're inevitably kind of crashing here. The dollar's becoming worthless and more worthless. And one complaint people have been emailing us saying, you predict the sky falling enough times for your whole life, eventually it's going to fall, so I'm not going to listen to anything you say.
Well, I think on the show we've been predicting that the inflation and the valuation of the dollar is going to be a problem for about 3 years now, and I think we've been pretty clear saying it's not necessarily going to be tomorrow, but
it's not
sometime in the next several years we'll probably see some serious inflation.
Right, and it's not that it's all going to happen at once necessarily. Yes, that could happen. That's hyperinflation, and we've talked about that before. There's a possibility that could happen. It's happened in places like Zimbabwe and Argentina, and we've touched on those issues where if the government wants to and it gets real scared, it can really bail itself out by printing a whole lot of money. But unfortunately, that really comes at a cost to the people and the wealth of the entire nation. We haven't seen hyperinflation here, but we have seen a significant amount. Prices really going up, and prices of things like precious metals, which don't exactly go with the value of a dollar, but generally over time seem to follow a trend. Prices of gold, record highs.
And that's, to understand this, and I'm not an economist, but if you want to understand, the price of food has actually gone up over the last few years, quite a bit actually. But people will say, well, consumer prices aren't going up that much. And to some extent that's true. But that's because consumers aren't spending all that much money, because a lot of consumers are out of work or have a family member who is, or they're concerned about losing their job. So they're saving a lot of their money. They're not spending a whole lot. If you want to look at where this new money is going, that the Fed is creating, a lot of it's going to banks, basically the investor class. They're just not handing every American a check for this money that they're printing off. So it can be assumed that a lot of this money that they're creating, this new money, cheap money, is going to be dumped into some kind of investment. And we have seen bubbles forming in assets. The real estate bubble was one example. The Fed did lower interest rates quite a bit, and they eased lending standards. They tried to essentially pump up the economy after the dot-com bubble burst, when the NASDAQ took a dive. I think a lot of people watching will remember that. And it led to an asset bubble in real estate. And today we're seeing, essentially the economy has crashed to some extent. The easy money isn't there anymore. That bubble burst. So they're trying to pump it up again is essentially what they're doing. It's kind of like a junkie trying to, stay high so they don't actually have to deal with the withdrawals, or an alcoholic trying to outrun a hangover by drinking the next morning.
Or, say, a poor college student taking out another credit card to pay off the old credit card. You get that influx of cash and you pay off the other credit card and you could start spending more money. It all works in generally the same way.
And if you're looking at, pumping up the value of the Dow Jones, you can do that perfectly well by inflating. Now, you're not actually creating new value, but you can pump up the prices of things. That's not actually making them more valuable. It's just making the dollar worth less and less. So, the Dow
has... So that's what's happening? The Dow's regained about three quarters of where it was.
It's back up.
So, but we haven't seen that much inflation.
60%. No, we haven't seen that much inflation on the consumer level. But that's what I'm saying. We've seen the Dow recover very rapidly, and one has to question whether the market, without all of this stimulus money and this money created by the Fed, whether the market should be at this point. I think we're seeing an inflated Dow Jones. I think we're seeing an inflated price of gold. I think we're seeing the prices of hard assets, things like precious metals. Eventually, I think we're going to see oil. Oil is climbing again. Oil, hard assets, eventually real estate again, and equities, stocks. We've already seen this start, and the prices of these things are going up because the dollar is weaker and weaker.
But wasn't that the idea in the beginning of these bailouts, was to boost the economy and get the Dow to start going up, so consumer confidence will kick in and people's stocks, and they can save for retirement?
Are you boosting the economy, or are you just creating nominal inflation in the Dow Jones?
Now it's getting confusing, CNEC. I see people's eyes out there glossing
I don't
over.
get into okay, but,
layman's terms.
let's say assuming that inflation affects the prices of everything equally, which it won't, but the simplest thought experiment you can go through is if you double the money supply, say you're playing a game of Monopoly, you double the money supply, then the relative price of everything will double as well. So you don't actually have any more purchasing power. Even if, let's say you make $30,000 a year today, they double the money supply, so eventually you're going to end up making $60,000 a year, but the price for everything that you buy is going to be twice as high. So effectively, you're not actually earning any more money, and you'll be in a higher tax bracket too, by the way, which is why the income tax actually applies to most Americans today. It didn't used to.
You got to carry around more dollar bills, but you're not going to be able to buy more stuff with them.
Exactly, or they'll just move the decimal. I mean, if it gets bad enough, they'll just move the decimal point over on the dollar bills.
Well, and there's also a federal program that is in the works to create the Amero if the dollar ever does completely crash, and that would be a dollar, kind of like the euro, where it's a currency unit, a union. That would be Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and that would really be losing a lot of our autonomy. And so let's hope it won't come to that. But this has been predicted. I mean, the Fed even said it when it was giving all this bailout money, trillions of dollars in bailout money. The whole plan was a year after it was injected and the economy starts to pick up, they were going to suck it back out of the economy so we wouldn't see inflation. Because it is a trickle-down effect. I mean, it's not all going to be happening at once. The federal government or the Fed will inject a whole bunch of money into the economy, and slowly it makes businesses more rich. But as the economy picks up, they promise to suck that money back out within a year's time so that the consumer, you and I, these lackeys who are working for a paycheck, so that we wouldn't see huge price increases in our savings account be wiped out due to inflation. They're supposed to suck that money up, and that's what they promised to do, but that's not what we see happening. We actually see these bailouts continuing, and in some cases new bailouts that were unexpected, and so it's almost the opposite.
To a large extent, they're not really going to be able to suck the money out of the economy. What they may do is raise interest rates, which makes it effectively more expensive to borrow money. You have to pay more back in interest when you take out a loan, whether you're a business or an individual. So it makes it more expensive to borrow more money, and it makes it more lucrative to simply save your money and not spend it. So if the interest rate's 10%, you're probably going to be getting somewhere close in the range of 10% for your savings account. So that's the idea, so that people won't borrow as much money and won't spend as much when they raise interest rates. But they're not doing that. I mean, the Fed has said that they're going to be keeping interest rates near 0% for the foreseeable future. So it's pretty, for the lender, for the bank, it's pretty darn cheap to borrow money and lend it back out. I mean, it's essentially free, pretty close to it, less
all
than 1%
profit.
Interest. Well, yeah, so there's a heavy incentive for lending to go on, for people to borrow, because the interest rates for the consumer are much lower.
It's funny, isn't that what got us into the problem in the first place?
Essentially, this is like...
Kick the can down the road.
It's like a kid having a sugar high. They crash, and instead of giving them some real food or some water or something, you just give them more sugar.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to fix the problem.
I liked your heroin analogy, too.
Yeah.
The heroin addict will sure feel good after he crashes down if you give him another injection.
Yeah.
Anyway, so will the economy. But what are you to do? We all want to work for a living. We all want to be happy. What is the average American supposed to do? And that's a bigger question, a question for another show. I mean, how to really fix this problem. It would really be like pulling off a Band-Aid. A lot of changes would be necessary. But anyways, if you have a different opinion, FMTV at freemindsmedia.org is the address, freemindstv.org. Freemindsmedia.org is the website. It's having some issues, but there's still the RSS feeds and ways to contact the show up there. Anyways, until next time, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a great night.